The program is also open to presenters who either present a concert series every year or a festival. So it can be, this can be an individual person who organizes these kinds of activities, or it can be an organization that does this kind of work. The third category of folks that can apply are composers. And composers can apply in one of two ways. You can either apply as a lead performing artist in an ensemble, playing the original composition. So say you're part of a group and you write, you write pretty regularly for the group, and you guys are known for premiering new works together. That would be something that would be eligible for a composer. Or you can be a composer who is outside of an ensemble, who is being commissioned by that ensemble to create a new work. Okay, that's that. Application requirements. So the first thing is that you must, and probably the most important thing about this project is that you must propose a project that includes the participation of one or more ensembles defined, and the Friends of Chamber Music defines these ensembles as a group of 2 or more musical performers, instrumentalists, or singers, each playing one on a part without a conductor. You must show a significant performance history, and for ensembles, you would show, for existing ensembles who have a collective history together, you would show the performances that you've done together in your season or in the past. For presenters, you would show your history of presenting various, doing various musical presentations. And for, let's see, got a little lost track of myself there for a second. For, oh golly, composers, you would end up showing a history of your work being performed and presented. And we'll talk a little bit later on about how we actually ask you to do that within the application itself. The other thing is that you must reside and work in one of the 15 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area, and you have to present your project for the MGP in one or more of those counties. There is actually, before I go on to the next bullet point, there is actually an exception to this. You can't, let's say you have a project where the majority of the individual musicians or the collective ensemble, they live here and they work here and they do performances here. But say you have like a guest artist from New York or LA or Seattle or anywhere else in the United States, and you want to bring them in specifically for this project, that would be eligible. You could do that through the MGP. The next bullet point is that you need to have an annual budget under $100,000. That means whatever your expenses or your income was last year would need to be under $100,000. You have to be at least 18 years of age and a U.S. citizen or have legal resident permit status. A couple of other things that are specific to people who have applied in the past, or not applied in the past, but have received funding in the past. The first thing is that if you received an MGP grant in 2013, you do have to wait one cycle and reapply in 2015. So 2015 would be the earliest that you could reapply. And you have to make sure that you have your project is completed and that you have your final report submitted. The second thing is that if you're an MVP grantee who received a grant in 2012 or earlier, you must have submitted your final report by January 31st of this year in order to reapply for the program. And if you are in that situation, you still have yet to do your report, you can find the reporting form on the San Francisco Friends of Chamber Music website. And if you have any questions about that, you can contact Dominique Pelletier, the executive director. I need to remind you that if you have any questions as I go along, please type them into the, which box is it? Into the questions box. And like I said earlier, we'll do the best that we can to answer general questions and major stuff that seems to be coming up for a lot of you as we go along. So actually, I'll give you a second actually to do that. Let's see. Oh, okay. So what if you're a composer? One of the questions is, what if you're a composer planning to do a project with an ensemble that was assembled just for the project in question? Well, that is eligible. That ensemble would fit in our category of a group of individual musicians coming together specifically for the work. And those individuals would need to show, well, you need to answer two questions in your narrative and performance history. We'll talk about that later. You'd have to answer why you're bringing together these, or why these specific musicians are being brought together for this project. And the other thing would be that they'd have to address their specific individual performance histories, just to give us a sense of their the professional level of their musicianship and experience. Let's see. The next question is, does the composer have to have a significant performance ensemble history with the ensemble proposed? That is, I would say, no, you don't have to have a significant performance history with the ensemble proposed. It can be something where you're working with them for the first time. That said, in your narrative, which we'll talk about, you'll want to make sure that you address the motivation question as to why you're working with this specific group. There's a couple more questions here, so I'll get to those. So let's see, regarding involving a guest in ensemble, can it be a guest from outside of the country? Yes, it can be a guest, someone from outside of the United States. And can groups involving people who receive grants for different groups in 2013 apply in 2014? I would say yes, but the different groups have to really differ from one another in the type of music and the style that you're playing. They have to be really distinct from one another. So it can't be like a Baroque group and then you're part of a different Baroque group that's getting support. But you know what, let's see, I think that came from Jacob. If you could just email me specifically, my email address will be up at the end of the presentation and we can talk about it a little bit more. And let me just get to one more question and then I'll move on. Can you define a significant performance history? Well, thank you for that question. Here's the tricky thing. In past years, we used to define a significant performance history as an ensemble that has at least 2 years of performance history together. And the reason why we changed it is that we were running into problems with people, individual musicians who wanted to apply, who definitely had a really significant performance history, but they hadn't worked with the same ensemble or group of people over that 2-year time period. So they were ineligible to apply. So we were realizing we weren't reaching a huge, a big swath of the community. So, I would say, if you're someone who is just coming out of the conservatory and you maybe just have a couple of performances under your belt out in the world as a musician, that would not be a significant performance history, and not that you couldn't apply, but that it would sort of put you at a less competitive advantage versus someone who has been working in the field for 5 years and has a performance history doing various things that's as long as your arm. So really it's something that you kind of have to gauge yourself. If you want, for the person who asked this question, and for anyone else who has a question about whether they have a significant performance history for them, you can email me and just tell me a little bit about what your history is, and I can kind of help you gauge your level of what I think your level of competitiveness might be in the program. Okay, so I'm going to move on and next talk about what we fund. So what kind of expenses can grant funds go towards? And also like what genres of music we support. So we support projects in early music, chamber music, new music, jazz, and creative music. Our grants are solely project-based. So there are funders out there who do general operating support grants, which will give you money to, keep the lights on and make photocopies and pay for cell phones and things like that. But we do strictly project-based grants. So you have to have an artistic project in mind that will wind up in some kind of public performance that the public can attend. Our awards are up to $3,000 in general, and then in cases where there is a commission involved, we give grants up to $4,000. You should be aware that although the cap is $3,000 and $4,000, in general, over the years, our grants have ranged anywhere from $1,500 up to $3,000. A lot of times, the way it works with our panel, and I should mention that these grants are decided by a 5-member panel of arts professionals from the Bay Area. But sometimes the way things end up being ranked within the system, the panelist decides, okay, we'll give projects that have very high rankings, the maximum grant amount, and projects that maybe have a lesser ranking but are still very strong, maybe they'll get $2,000 or $2,500. So it kind of sometimes gets divvied up that way. So I just want to make you aware that that's a possibility. The grant period for this and your project period can begin no earlier than July 1st, 2014, and then the window for the project ends on June 30th, 2016. So we give you a solid 2-year window to actually undertake and complete your project. Okay, so what do we fund? For performers and composers, we will fund artist performance and rehearsal fees, composer fees, PR and marketing costs specific to the project. So, if you're doing like advertising online or in a paper of some sort, that's specific to a performance, a cumulative performance that you're doing at the end of the project. Sound and video recording of the project, so any kind of documentation will support that. Rental for the venue at which you're going to be doing your performance. A direct production cost. So, for example, if your project ends up having specific sound or say, lighting requirements or piano tuning or anything else having to do with the readiness of the instruments or anything like that, we would fund that, as well as any say technical people that you might have to bring on board, like a sound designer or a lighting designer, someone in that field where you need support. Or, for example, if you're an ensemble that is going to be doing a recording, it would also pay for like sound engineering costs. The one thing to note for performers and composers is that we do have a one application rule. So performers and composers can only appear on one application per cycle. So if you're, say a composer who is in the enviable position of being commissioned by a couple of different ensembles, you would need to decide which commission you're going to do. You wouldn't be able to apply for both. So for presenters, the things that we fund are a little bit different. We'll fund artist rehearsal and performance fees through the group or groups that you are presenting. So here we can do a fee. If you're presenting a concert series, we will support the fee for one artist on the series. If you happen to be a presenter who does a festival, then you can use the MGP grant for fees for multiple artists engaged on the festival. Not that you necessarily have to do that, but that is an option for you. And that's an option that's available to people who do festivals, not concert series. Presenters can also support composer fees or get funding to support composer fees from the MGP. Direct production costs, like I mentioned earlier. One thing to note that's different here for presenters versus performers, and composers is that we will not support PR or marketing costs. And I think I'm going to take some questions here. Okay. Let's see. In the past, let me see here. Oh. Okay. So someone had a question about organizational development type projects where in the past, let me give a little bit of background. In the past, the MGP program supported things like helping ensembles develop an organizational marketing plan or a business plan or things that were related to the administrative functions of the group. And kind of helping them build up their capacity to deal with those kinds of things. And we did give awards in the past. That is no longer the case. These starting in 2014, we are focusing solely on artistic-based projects. So we do not support career or organizational development projects any longer. Although someone has just pointed out to me that we do support CD recording costs because we do recognize that that is both an artistic project and in a lot of ways also a career development type project because it helps ensembles raise the visibility of their work. So recording, CD recording, we definitely do still support. Oh. Okay. Let's see. One more question. This is a great question. Do you support a combination of a performance and education project? No, unfortunately, we do not at this time through the MGP support projects that integrate education or educational outreach in them. It's strictly for artistic purposes. Artistic purposes only. Someone has a question about if there's an advantage to asking for a larger grant award. No, it's not. You should ask for what you need. So if you have a need that is $3,000, then that's what you should ask for. That said, we do recognize that $3,000 won't support all, in all likelihood, won't support all the costs of a project. But it's just going to be a smaller part of like a larger project that costs a little bit more. You know, even if it costs $5,000, $7,000, or $10,000. So yeah, we just encourage you to ask for what you need. You know, if you have what you need happens to be $3,000, and you make a case for that in your narrative and in the project budget you submit, great. You know, if you find that, well, you know, we have a need that's going to cost $2,000, and we've got, you know, $3,000 or $6,000 other dollars coming to support the rest of the project, that's great too. So yeah, just ask for what makes sense for what you need. Yes. Okay. So someone had I did address the recording of a CD be included in cost covered. Yes, absolutely. You can ask for recording costs for a CD. I'm just looking at some more questions here before I move on. Oh, okay. So someone's asking a question about, is it okay for a composer to write music for an ensemble that will perform with live dancers? Yes, that kind of project would be eligible for you to apply. Something that involves, you know, multidisciplinary performance. With that said, the music really needs to be at the forefront of the project, really, in order to be competitive. And if you have, for the person who asked that question, if you have something more specific you want to ask me about the project, please feel free to email me. So let me just move on here. The deadline for submission is Saturday, February 15th, 2014. That is a postmark deadline. So as long as you go to the post office and get the stamp in by that, get it stamped and in the mail by that day, you are good. We ask that you use United States Postal Service only. Please don't use FedEx or UPS overnight. It helps save us headaches and you expense. We don't accept, and kind of on that note, we don't accept hand deliveries. There's no one at the location where the applications end up being mailed to. And the awards are announced in mid-April 2014, mid to late April. Okay, so let me just, before I get into the application requirements, let me just, looks like we had a couple more questions come in, so I'll get to those. Someone's asking about, can we use grant funds to cover travel fees to concerts or festivals? And no, unfortunately, that's not an eligible cost. And then someone's asking about, another question is about if you have a work that's already been composed for the ensemble and you want to make a CD recording of it, if that's eligible. And yes, absolutely, that kind of project is eligible for support. All right, so let's move on to application requirements. Actually, can everyone raise their hand if they have the application packet? Not the guidelines. Not, yeah, just the application. Yeah, I'm sorry. It would just be the application. So it would start off with application checklist, and then the next page goes on to talk about application information. Either raise your hand to let us know if you have that. Not everybody. Okay, it looks like half of you do and half of you don't. So for those of you who don't have that, I strongly, oh wait, looks like more people have it. Okay, great. Looks like most everyone has it. If you don't have it, I recommend that you go to the Friends of Chamber Music website, Music Grant section, and download the application so you can follow along while I'm talking about these requirements. So I'm going to launch into them right now. Okay, I'm skipping the application checklist page, which is the first page, because that's just a place for you to check off to make sure that you have all the material before you submit the application. And I'm going right to the information page, applicant information page. It's pretty straightforward. It just is, we're asking you to include your contact information, email address. We do ask you to include your operating budget for the current year. So how much income or how much expenses you kind of expect to bring in. Then we ask you to put in your total project budget, which basically you'll just take from the project budget page that we'll talk about later on. The amount of the request, and then what the timeline is for the project. And down here we put a little reminder just to tell you about, what the 2-year project period is. So just to be clear, your project needs to take place within this window. And probably the most important thing on this page is to do the description of the project. So just to summarize what it is that you're asking for and what your goals are. There are some great examples of project summaries for our past awards. If you go to this link on our website, it will show you, and you click on all the past awards, you will see all these one-paragraph summaries. Basically, we just list those right from people's applications. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history background page. So on this page, applicants should include a strong artistic statement about what your mission is, what your purpose is, your background, and your history. Now, in cases where you're a collective ensemble, you've been working together for a while, this is pretty straightforward. But in cases where people who are individuals applying together to work together, and you may have histories individually as performers and artists, but not necessarily a history working together. So this would be the space. In this space, if you're in that situation, you would want to include information about each individual who is a part of this collective group that's coming together for this specific project. And you want to address, you know, like their background, their education background, their performance background, things that they've done as artists, you know, awards that they have gotten or some kind of local recognition. Just to help us meet, to show us how you're meeting that the history background requirement. If the project involves a collaborative partner, you want to include, you'll see that there are actually 2 pages for this section, for this history background of applicant section. So let's say you're in the situation of you are a composer and you're being commissioned by either an existing ensemble or one coming together specifically for the project. On the first page, you would include information about the ensemble or group of individual musicians. On the second page, that would be the place where the composer would talk about his or her history and background. Oh, thank you. So let me just add in here for the information page. If you are, we're talking about for individuals, right? Okay. So just to add something into what I was saying about situations for projects that involve individual musicians coming together specifically for the project. In addition to talking about each individual musician's background, you'd want to talk about for each individual musician give an example of what your repertoire is. Oh, also if you're a new young group, that if you are a group, an ensemble that's young, hasn't been together for very long, but you are a collective group, I really recommend that you give the panelists an idea in the history background section of what your repertoire is and what kind of music you've played. This will be reiterated in your performance history section, which we'll get to in a second. But I think it's good to point that out in this section for the panel. And then I'm also going to take some questions here. I'm sorry, I don't have too many, so I'll just I'll keep trucking on, and then I'm sure you guys are going to have some more, I'd imagine, as we talk about performance history and get a little bit more into the narrative. So performance history, section C. So here we ask you to list the date, the venue, the number of people who attended, and what kind of program repertoire for your recent performances. So for performers and composers, this should reflect performances of the performers for the proposed project. And for composers, this should reflect performances of your past work. You know, who has performed your work, where it's been performed, how many people attended. So if it's because of the way we set up the NGP grants, where composers have to apply with an eligible ensemble, you'll have to kind of sort of pick and choose, do a balance between things that talk about performances where you're talking about the performers and performances where you're talking about the performances of the composer's work. For presenters, this section should reflect your recent presentations. So you should basically be working from 20 2013 or 2014 if you've already had some performances backwards. And I would say the same thing holds true for performers and composers. So what you do if your performance history is longer than 4 pages? What we recommend is that you create a selected list containing those public performances that best support the project that you're asking support for and are going to be most useful for panelists. So in the case of performers who want to do new music, not necessarily commission, but say you do both new music and you do classical music, but you're asking for a project in which you want to do contemporary music, you would definitely want to pick out those performances that where you performed contemporary music, who you performed, where you performed, how many people you reached, and kind of de-emphasize the performances of classical music. Someone's asking about, so is it better to summarize a whole tour in one field or just list the highlights? I think I recommend just listing the highlights. And again, it kind of speaks to tie into what I was saying before. You would want to choose those highlights that best support the project that you're asking for support. Oh, this is a great question too. About whether or not performances have to be in the Bay Area. What if you're a San Francisco performer who tours a lot? Including performances that are outside of the Bay Area are fine. I would definitely make sure that you include as many Bay Area performances as possible as you've done. And then if you need to fill in the rest with your non-Bay Area performances. But you definitely do want to show that you do have some kind of activity happening here in the Bay Area, even if it's not, a super long list. Okay, question about the use of technology when doing the application, just some technical stuff about whether it's better to type right directly into the PDF file or to use Word and cut and paste. In addition to doing this work, I work as a grant writer and a fundraiser, and I always write my applications for online stuff or stuff that uses PDFs. I always write it in Word, and then I end up cutting and pasting, and I find that works really well for me. Because you just never, our forms are, thoroughly, tested and checked, but, you can't always account for every single operating system out there and for when strange things happen. So yeah, I really recommend writing in Word, so at least you save everything and then cutting and pasting in later. Okay, so let's see, D, project description. This is another part of the narrative, and in here we give you 2 pages to address the following points. The first thing is, the first thing you really want to address is what you want to do, why you want to do it, and how much. So, what will you do? What specifically will you be doing? Performance, recording, presentation of an ensemble, a festival, and what resources do you need to do it? Then why are you doing it? What's motivating you? What's driving you to do this particular project at this time? Why are you excited about it? Why are you jazzed about it? will it raise your profile as in the Bay Area with audiences in the Bay Area? If so, how is that going to happen? And then what impact could it potentially have on local audiences? And if for those of you who are doing a project where the ensemble is being specifically formed for this project, we'd like to know, I think it's good to address why these specific performers have been chosen for the work. I think it's particularly relevant in cases where you're commissioning work. And then how much will it cost? Give us a breakdown of of what the project costs are and what the major ones are. What's going to be the most expensive thing? Is it going to be artist fees and rehearsal fees? Does your project have a particularly big technology component to it that is unusual? Will that be a big cost? If you're doing a recording, will there be, we'll be putting a lot into sound engineering and PR and marketing for that particular recording. How will you use the money of the MGP award? What specific piece of your project will that award help support? Let's see, in the next section after this project description is publicity and promotion. So this is a place for you to share about information about what you're going to do, for you to share what you're going to do with the public. How many people do you expect to reach? If you're applying for something that results in a public performance, and really, and a recording, I think it kind of applies to recording too. How are you going to promote the performance or the release of your CD or recording? What kind of steps are you going to take to do some outreach with the public? And then we come to timeline. So here's where we want you to describe what the major dates are for your project. How does it break down between sort of conception and creation, then into rehearsal and refinement, and then into performance? What are sort of the breakout of those phases? If you're a presenter and you're doing a festival, what's the timeline for you to sort of choose your ensembles for the festival or the program for the festival, and then to start marketing it and fundraising for it, and then to actually have it come to fruition and take place in the public eye. So I just wanted to share some tips for the proposal narrative. Just as someone who's been doing this program for 5 years and has read a lot of MGP proposals and led the panel on making decisions about grant awards, definitely have noticed some things that I see that can really help potential applicants strengthen their applications. So the first thing I really recommend people is just to give yourself plenty of time with the narrative. Begin as soon as you can. I know it can be very tough with, we all lead really, really busy lives, and I myself, as a grant writer and fundraiser, have on more than one occasion sort of burned the midnight oil doing a grant proposal at the last minute. But I can tell you based on experience that the earlier you start, the more thoughtful you can be with it, especially with the narrative, and the more you can really put your best foot forward and describe your project in the best possible way. And the second thing is really to answer the questions. We have, if you notice on this project description especially, we have written out specific questions that we want you to answer. And that we really, really want answers to those questions. We really want to know. So a lot of times what I tell people to do is when they're sitting down and they're getting ready to write their narrative, I say, okay, take a question like, okay, let's say, describe your project in detail. What will you do? And I say, turn it around and answer it just as a statement. So I will do this. I want to do this project because, or blah, blah, you know, and then just sit down and get that first draft down on paper. And it may be bumpy and ugly and not exactly the way you want it, but, you know, just get it down on paper, and then you can always go back and refine it and make it more of what it is that you want to say. I highly recommend using simple and clear language to describe what it is that you're going to do over very complex and convoluted explanations about, you know, your artistic process or your philosophy or, you know, what it is that you plan to do. Just simple, clear language is always better. Shorter sentences are better and more understandable and easier to read than something, you know, longer that goes on for like 4 or 5 lines. And the last thing I do is have someone else read it. Once you've gotten into a decent draft form, have someone else take a look at it and see if it makes sense to them. Because in a way, that person is almost like, you know, a panelist, because the panelist is probably going to be reading this for the first time. And you want to make sure that someone who has a fresh set of eyes on it understands where you're coming from and what it is you're trying to accomplish. Next, I'm going to get into the project budget. As soon as I can find my own project budget page so I can take a look at it while I'm talking to you. Let's see here. Okay. So if you're taking a look at the project budget, before I get into the nitty gritty, one of the things I want to point out with the project budget is that it really is like an extension and a complement to your narrative. So you want to make sure that the things that you're including as income and expenses in your narrative are make sense in relationship with your make sense in relationship with your project budget. So, for example, if you're doing a TV recording and your narrative says, well, we're going to have all this expense related to sound engineering and there's some kind of technical direction, and then we're also going to have, we're sending this out far and wide, so we're going to have high PR and marketing costs. But then when the panel looks at your project budget, they say, for example, if you look under expenses, under personnel, there's nothing for technical and production, nothing for sound engineer, or you have like $200 in PR and marketing, then there's sort of there's a disconnect here between, what you're talking about in your narrative for your project and the actual, resources that you're going to need to be able to make it happen. Let me talk a little bit on the income side about what you might find in contributed and earned. So contributed is anything that comes to you that you didn't accumulate through your own devices, as a performer, either through doing performances or say, on the side you do like some educational outreach work that you then take and use towards fueling your artistic project. So it could be something from a foundation, from individuals, like if you have family and friends who are going to give money towards the project. We include a line item for your NGP grant request. And then, as I mentioned, there's also a whole section in the budget for earned income. So things like what you expect to earn from the project for ticket sales. Product sales would include things that you are going to sell at performances, T-shirts, coffee mugs, baseball caps, that kind of thing. CDs would also be included there if you're asking, doing a recording and you want to include your CD sales in there. I talked a little bit about outreach program fees or performance fees that you've accumulated and you want to use towards the project. We also have on this side the in-kind donation. And I'll talk a little more in depth about in-kind donations, what that is, or what kind of things can be included there. But basically, an in-kind donation is any non-cash good or service that you receive for the project. And I'll talk more about what those kinds of things could be. But you can definitely include them here in your budget. Because I know with a lot of ensembles and individual musicians, there is a strong reliance a lot of times on in-kind contributions. So we wanted to make sure that you had space in the budget to be able to include those things. So then on the expense side, we have it broken down into 3 different areas. Expenses for your personnel, including your artists involved in the project, any kind of commission fee for your composer. Excuse me, I take a drink of water there for a second. And any kind of technical or production. Sorry about that. And then we have project expenses. So pretty much anything that's not related to the personnel who are involved in the project. So that would be, production costs for, let's say you have lighting or sound equipment that you have to rent or other things that could be included under production. PR and marketing. Printing and postage. Rentals would include like venue rental. It could also include equipment rental. You could also include equipment rental under equipment, or if you have to buy specific pieces of equipment for your project, you can include that there. And then the third category is administrative expenses. So that includes anything like rent, occupancy, like say you have like an office. This usually applies to a group that is a little bit larger in size, budget-wise, but if you have an office space that you use, and you use it to plan this project and carry it out, you can include a portion of those expenses here. If you're using your cell phone and the internet, you can include a portion of those bills here, whatever a portion applies to this project. Same thing goes with like other kinds of office expenses. Insurance can go here if you need to do liability insurance for your project. You'd include that in this category. A couple of things about budget notes. Budget notes, again, like your project budget, are an extension of your narrative. They give you a place where you can provide detail on your income and expenses. And in the application form, there are actually some great examples of information to include in the project budget and how to lay it out. I just want to point out a couple of things that that I think that happen pretty commonly, just to give you a sense of how you want to address it, address your budget note. So on the income side, for contributed income, let's say that in addition to the musical grant program, you are applying to the Zellerbach Family Foundation because they're a local foundation that does a lot of supportive new work and new music. So you have applied for funding, you've applied for a $2,500 grant, you included that in a line item for foundations. Here is where you would say, you know, Zellerbach Family Foundation, $2,500 pending, and that you would be detailing that out. Another place I want to point out where you want to make sure that you provide an explanatory budget note is with the admissions or ticket sales line item. I really recommend that you list your ticket prices with the venue capacity, expected sales. And just to sort of fair warning, the panelists are usually really well versed in like what capacities are of various venues. So if you bring in a capacity for a venue, if you have a suggested capacity that's really high for a particular venue that the panel knows is actually much smaller than that, you know, there's going to come a question will come up as to whether or not you have the capacity to really carry out your project, and an understanding of really what the costs are, or what your true income is going to be on this project. You know, is it realistic or not? In addition to this, we have it in the application. We have the budget notes listed out as line items, and you can certainly describe it this way. You're saying line one, you know, Zellerbach Family Foundation, $2,500. You can also instead provide more of a narrative description of your budget notes, and we provide an example of that on the website. On the, it'll be in our frequently asked questions section. There'll be an example of what more of a paragraph, more narrative style of budget note looks like. Other questions? I am thinking that talking about length of the webinar. So I would say that we're probably going to be on this for another 20 minutes. And then after that, we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. And it looks like we have a question specific to the budget, which I would love to answer. Okay, so a question about administrative experience or administrative expense category for the project budget, and people, how it's relevant for individual performers. So yes, if you are an individual performer and you say you have a home office space that you use for the project, you can include that expense in administrative expenses, with the caveat that you would only want to include your expenses that are relevant to the artistic project. So let's say, for example, you're doing an artistic project and it starts in August of 2014, and you're going to perform it in November of 2014. And so you would just, and you say, okay, and I think of my total home office expense, I probably will use about 25% of it specifically for this project, and the rest of 75% of it is like for, other kinds of activities. You would then, take 25% of your monthly office expense, office rent, and include that in your administrative line item or in the administrative section. So here's a couple of tips about doing the budget. I may have already addressed some of them. Oh, but here's a good one. So in the end, you want to make sure that your income equals your expenses. And the nice thing about our PDF form is that if you do not, you'll see that there's a surplus deficit item down at the bottom. If your expenses end up exceeding your income, that little box, the number inside will turn red, letting you know that you've entered the danger zone and that you need to look at your budget again and equalize your income and your expenses. And in general, that's I mean, for those of you who are maybe applying for a grant for the first time, that in general, when you're applying for grants from foundations or funders, you do want to submit a budget where your income equals expenses. Okay, budget notes, I already said that you could describe it by line item or as a narrative. And I think I could talk more specifically about this. I talked about how the budget notes relate to the narrative and help support that. They also, I think, address your capacity to fundraise for the project. Your budget notes give you a chance to, if say you've been, you've been at this for a little while, and in terms of doing artistic work and raising money for it successfully and doing successful projects. This gives you a chance to be able to say, yes, I have the ability to raise X number of dollars from individual donors because I raised the same amount for the last project I did, or I just did an Indiegogo campaign for this last project and I made this, or did a Kickstarter campaign, I made this. So I definitely feel like I can meet this goal again for this project and for what I'm proposing here for this MGP grant. Okay, I already talked a little bit about this, about the items in the budget matching what you described in the narrative. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more specifically about in-kind. So we talked about the fact that these are non-cash goods and services, and here's some examples of the kinds of in-kind donations that you could potentially include in your application. So it could be donated time that artists spend creating or rehearsing the project. Let's say that you have a venue or a performance space that donates their space for your use, which is great. So you could include the whatever the cash equivalent of that rental in your in-kind line item. The same is true if, say, you have an office space that you get for free. You could include that in there as well. Other professionals, maybe who are donating their services to your project, like say you have a piano tuner who will tune the instrument for free, or you have a graphic designer who's going to design a really great logo or postcard or image for your use for your CD or in order to promote your performance. Or free program printing donated by a printer. If you're going to have, like, say you have a reception, you know, before or after your performance or your festival, you might have food or amber beverages that are donated by a business. I think the most important thing, regardless of what it is that you're listing for in-kind donations, is to be sure that you account for them on both the income and expense sides of the budget. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, let me, I just wanted to point out the one last thing on the budget before I move on to talk about work samples. On the form, you don't have to worry about filling in every single line item. Some items are going to be more applicable to your project than others. And we've also left spaces on the form for you to fill in your own specific topics that may not necessarily be listed on our form. So we do give you space to do that. So work samples. Every single application has to include a work sample. It's part of giving the panel an idea of your the professional level of the work and your and gives them an indication of the quality of your work. So all applications must include one CD. You can include a DVD if that is instead, if that's more relevant. I know there are groups out there who work in a very multidisciplinary way. Although music's at the core of what they do, they use some theatrical elements, and that ends up being a really important part of the work. And so we understand that you want the panel to be able to see that. So we do allow DVD work samples in those cases. If you have any kind of doubt about or question about whether or not you should include a DVD work sample and you're in that position, you should send me an email and we can talk about it more specifically to your group and project. You must include 2 contrasting works or excerpts of longer works. Each of these works or excerpts can be no more than 4 minutes in length each. So you can include either a full work, you know, that's 4 minutes or less in length, or you can include an excerpt, a 4-minute excerpt from a work. We do prefer that one sample be from a live performance. Now I just want to talk about work samples that are specific to the type of project that you're asking support for, because we do have some specific things that we're looking for in certain situations. For projects involving a performer and composer, we ask that you include 2 contrasting samples each for a total of 4 tracks. So that's 2 samples for the performing group and 2 for the composer. For the composer, if you want to include a score or a lead sheet, you can do so, but that is optional. And you need to either email it by PDF, which the email address is in the guidelines and application instructions, or send a hard copy with your application. And that has to be submitted by the deadline. Unfortunately, we're not able to accept it after the deadline. For presenters, we ask that you compile, and this is for presenters of a series. We ask that you compile a single CD with selections for the group you intend to present. It should be no longer than 8 minutes maximum. We ask that you do not submit commercial CDs of the group that you're presenting. And someone has something specific. Someone's wondering if they can submit a video instead of physical discs. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the capacity right now to be able to look at stuff like that. We have to look at you do have to submit physical CD or DVD. Hopefully that will change in the future, but not this year. For festival presenters, we ask that you compile a recording of the folks that you presented at the festival in your previous year. And again, the 8 minutes maximum in length for the CD work sample applies for festival presenters too. And we do ask also, please don't submit commercial CDs. There have been times in the past where people have, instead of submitting a single CD, have submitted like, 3 or 4 different commercial CDs, and that's just sort of a nightmare for us. I wanted to give you some tips for choosing your work sample. The quality of the sound is really, really important. Yeah, I mean, just think about it. Just to give you some context, the CD work sample, when the panelists come together for our review days, they've read all of the applications, but before they even start talking about any application, the first thing they do is they listen to the applicant's work sample. And if the sound quality is poor, that can have a really direct impact on how a panel is going to feel and talk about your work or about your work during the discussion period. Make sure that you choose contrasting selections. So it's really great for the panelists to hear the variety of work that you do. So, don't necessarily, make sure that if you have a piece that is more slow and delicate, that you contrast it with a selection that is more robust and faster, more energetic. Play to your strengths. Cued is a section that shows you off the best. A lot of times in my experience, people will send in work samples that start at the beginning. And the beginning maybe starts out very slow and kind of maybe moody, and it's not until a couple of minutes in that it starts getting really engaging. Rather than starting at that slower, more building place, started at the place where it's really getting engaging. Also, for ensembles that have played together, if you're a collective group that's coming together and you've worked together before, it's really important for the panelists to hear a sample where they're hearing you all play together, as opposed to like a series of solos. Make sure, think about how you can select samples that are relevant to the project. So, if you're doing, you're asking support to do some performances of contemporary music, you don't necessarily want to send your 2 work samples that show how well you play, ROM. See, the work sample list. This needs to correspond with the tracks you submit on your CD or DVD. And we give you space to just include information about the musical samples included on the CD. So, just like what the name of it is, who the players are. There's also some space if you need to provide any kind of more additional context for the sample. You certainly have room to be able to do that. Make sure you label your CD or your DVD with your ensemble name. That really helps us keep track of all the work samples during the review process. As part of your support material, you can include a press review or preview. This is totally optional. It's not mandatory. Please don't include any postcards or promotional materials. And I have a couple of questions about work samples. So there's a question about if you're a composer / performer requesting funding for a CD for a work, is it better to have a demo of the work that you're planning to record? I think based on my experience with the panel, I do think it's a good idea if you have a good quality sound, the sound quality is good, that to include a demo of what you plan to record is always a good idea, as well as an example of what your past work is. And then, someone's asking about the sound quality about a live recording, absolutely not being necessarily as clean as what is in a studio recording. And I think that the panel takes that into consideration when they're listening to the work samples. I would say that for live performances, they're less harsh, or less critical, I should say, of maybe some things that are funky about the sound in a live situation than if they're listening to something that they know is a studio recording where the sound quality is poor. I feel like in those cases, for something like a studio recording, it's really much more important to make sure the sound quality is good versus a live performance. It's not a requirement, it's not a requirement that you include a live recording. It just we just prefer it, strongly prefer if you can, if you're able to. But of course, if you're not, sending in 2 studio recordings is fine. For supporting materials, the additional supporting materials there is a letter of commitment required. And this is for a project involving any partner not listed as a primary applicant. So examples of this would be instances where a composer is being commissioned by an outside ensemble. If you're a composer who's part of an ensemble and you're creating a work for that ensemble, you do not need to include a letter of commitment. 2 other examples of where a letter of commitment is needed would be in cases where a ensemble is commissioning a composer, and then that piece is a presenter has committed to presenting that piece on their festival or on their series. Then you would need a letter of commitment signed by all 3 parties, the composer, the performer, and the presenter. The third instance is when a presenter of a concert series is presenting an ensemble. You would, again, need to present a letter of commitment saying that you are committed to presenting this ensemble on your upcoming series. And then the last instance would be instances where you are individual musicians coming together specifically for this project. You need to submit a letter of commitment saying that your intention to work together on this project, and it needs to be signed by all the members of this sort of impromptu group. We have examples of letters, templates on our website. on the MTP grant section. We ask that you plan ahead. These letters must be submitted with the application. The panelists don't see the letters, so you can spend as little time on them as possible. We strongly recommend that you use the templates on the website. These letters are solely for the Friends of Chamber Music's use, just to make sure that we're not getting any duplicate applications. This ties into what I was saying earlier about the one application rule. Just make sure that we're not getting, you know, 3 different applications to commission the same composer, or 3 different applications for 3 different presenters to present the same ensemble. A couple of other things. If you happen to be an organization where your expenses are more than $75,000, we do ask you to submit a cultural data project report or your 990 tax return for your most recently completed fiscal year. Again, this is only for people and organizations, I should say organizations, ensembles with expenses or income more than $75,000. And then the last thing is the application checklist, which was we talked about at the top of the hour. That just gives you, lets us know, lets you check off to make sure that you've gotten all the materials that that you need for the application, and lets us know that you've covered all your bases. So getting ready to submit. We ask that you only use those PDF forms available at sffcm.org. For those of you who have applied in the past, please do not use last year's application materials. Everything is brand new, and you should just go right to the website and download this year's materials. This is all listed in the application information forms, but the complete paper application includes 1 copy of your checklist, 8 double-sided hard copies of the printed application with those specific items listed there, 1 work sample CD or DVD. You do not need to submit 8 work sample CDs or DVDs. Just 1 will do. 1 score if it's applicable. 1 letter of commitment signed by all the participating necessary parties, if that's applicable. 1 CD report or tax return, if that is applicable to you. And if you want your work sample returned, you can include a self-addressed stamped envelope. So if you have any questions, I can take some more questions now. In addition, there are a few different resources you can pull on. You can, of course, email me directly at mgp@sffcm.org, and I try very hard to get back to people within 24 hours. We also have a frequently asked questions section on our website, which has a lot of useful information. I recommend that you take a look at that before emailing me, actually, because a lot of questions that we've received in the past are answered there. And there also in the application forms themselves, there's a list of do's and don'ts around submitting the application. And now I know that Fernando has answered a lot and has answered a lot of your questions as we go along, but I'd be happy to take on any questions that we weren't able to get to earlier or that you have come up right now. Oh, okay. Okay. We'll see. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so the question is, if you have a recording already completed and you want to put out a CD of it, would this qualify it for the grant? Yes, this would qualify for the grant. I will say, though, that the panel does tend to favor CD recording projects where the whole phase of it is included. So it's where you are asking for the recording and then the release of it. I have seen that it's a little more challenging for projects where you're just asking for the release of it. It's a little more challenging to get those funded. You really have to put forth, make a really strong case for it in your narrative as to why you're asking for that piece of it and how the release of it is going to impact you, how it's going to impact the community. Someone has a question about applicants with budgets above $75,000 in terms of how that relates to individual performers or sole proprietors. I think I would ask the person who will respond to you. I ask you to email me specifically to talk about your specific situation, and then I can advise you further. Not advising him. So that brings us to the end of the evening, and I don't see any further questions. And I really want to thank everyone for their time, and I hope this is helpful to you. Please, I am available to you to answer any questions and to help you in completing this application process. So please do not hesitate to contact me with any and all questions. And thank you so much, and good luck with doing your application.